Well, the first thing to point out is, of course, that there is no such thing as Europe and the United States when it comes to capital punishment, but we have on the European side, of course, a lot of different states, and on the US side, of course, the federal states which have criminal law jurisdiction, and therefore a lot of states have capital punishment on their books and others that don't. So if we're talking about major differences, we of course talk about the difference between the US states plus the federal level that do have capital punishment on one hand, and the European nations that uniformly abolished capital punishment in a long process after World War II. As you know, the European Union now forbids it, and it was part of the Copenhagen criteria that regulated the criteria under which Eastern European states could join the European Union. So we have Europe, which is death penalty free, and we have US states which still have the death penalty. Some do executions, some don't. So and this has given a lot of rise to a big debate about whether there is some kind of civilizational difference in terms of Europe being the more civilized continent, whereas the US is the last Western industrialized nation that still has the death penalty and applies it. There are, of course, a lot of differences, but maybe they can be, I can give you three ones that stand out. And the first one is the centralized nature of political systems in Europe versus a more centralized and federal tradition in the US, at least when it comes to criminal policy making. The second are the structural incentives or nudges that existed because of European integration. And the third is, I think, what can be called the more participatory or more democratic style of criminal policy making in the US versus a different style in at least continental Europe, where experts have more to say. In legal terms, of course, and I think the sociological situation in which Europe is that it's difficult to bring the death penalty back. But I'm convinced that this is not irreversible, so that if conditions change, if we have a flood of terrorism, or if we see what might happen in terms of migration and climate change, and like that can bring about some chaotic situation, it is not clear to me that we can keep this legal situation. So if you look at the situation in Germany, for example, you have very high support in the end of the 40s after Second World War, even though the Nazis used death penalty as an instrument of terror. You still had more than half of the people which supported it, and now it's only like 23%. But as I said, in other countries, it's different. And for example, if we look at France, where the president has just announced an initiative, an international initiative against the death penalty, you have more than half, like 55% of French citizens in a representative survey saying they support the death penalty. So this is, the situation is ambiguous, and I would say that there is a fundamental difference in the way the legal situation is. But in a sociological sense, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure, for example, if the southern states that use death penalty most and where politics against the death penalty is deeply unpopular, whether and when they will move to the abolitionist side. But I would certainly hope the most efficient abolition, of course, would be through the Supreme Court. And as we all know, at the moment, this is, I think, can be ruled out that abolition will come via the Supreme Court. The most effective way to argue against capital punishment and to convince people has been to show that innocent people have been executed and or have been sentenced to death and found innocent early enough before they were actually put to death. And this leads one to the conclusion that is probably the most efficient argument to show that it can hit everybody, that it can be your son or daughter or husband or wife or whatever who could be put to death innocently. Whereas arguments, as I have said, to say, well, you're kind of on a lower degree of civilization, probably won't work, and many arguments that are used in the debate. So again, I think we have to concentrate on what works best and hopefully convince more US federal states to abolish the death penalty.